Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Middle Class Rockstar. I'm your host, Andy Sito. We're on number 51. Last week was a special episode, the landmark number 50 with Sarah Slayton. If you haven't heard that one yet, when this one ends, it'll take you directly to it if you're on the Middle Class Rockstar page of whatever streaming platform you listen on. And the podcast is on all streaming platforms as well as YouTube now. So if you want to see our pretty little faces as we talk, if you want to see me itch my nose, whatever, head on over to YouTube and look up this episode. And they're all being posted on my YouTube channel. That's maybe one positive thing that's come out of being a musician in the COVID era is I've expanded the online presence of the podcast ever so slightly. The listenership of this podcast is expanding a little bit more than ever so slightly, however. We teamed up with Chris K's Colorado Playlist, and that is a weekly radio show that Chris K does. He's been on the air in Colorado for almost 45 years. It's a weekly show that he does featuring Colorado music, and it is played on 25 different FM frequencies for 52 hours a week all over Colorado. And now when you listen to his radio show, the Colorado Playlist, every episode that we have of this podcast, we're putting together a 7 to 8 minute clip, sometimes a little longer, that is getting played on Chris's show. So Chris, thank you so much for having us. And Chris K has been on the podcast twice. He was just a few episodes ago for his second visit. And he always has tons of data and analytics for indie artists. He's just been around forever, and he's a great resource if you're curious about what's been going on in the music industry or what might happen next. He's a really interesting guy to chat with about that kind of stuff. If you enjoy this podcast and want to support in a monetary way, I'm now on Patreon at patreon.com/Andy Sidow, Sydow. And that is supporting both my music career and this podcast, and I've been putting up unreleased songs on there. I'm going to start putting up some exclusive content for podcast listeners too. I'm not even really sure yet. I'm just experimenting with different ideas of things I can put up for content, but for as little as $3 a month, which is less than the cup of coffee at Starbucks, you can support and help keep this podcast rolling for another 50 episodes and beyond. If you're not in a position to support in a monetary way, I certainly understand. You know what you can do for me that's almost just as good, and I would absolutely love it. Rate and write a review wherever you listen to your podcast, especially if you're listening on Apple Music. Give me that 5-star review in a quick little write-up. It'll take about 30 seconds, and it really, really is a huge help for me. So thank you in advance for considering that. As we're coming towards the end of the year, everybody's wondering, what's going on with this thing? Are we going to have a vaccine? Will there be big concerts in summer of 2021? Will indie artists be able to tour in certain states? Or is this all going to stay locked down for a while longer? And whatever you do and whatever your goals and aspirations are, I hope that you're doing all right, and I hope that you've been able to adjust your plan and kind of roll with the punches a little bit. And, however you've been reacting to things, I wish you the very best as 2020 comes to a close and a new year begins. And for a lot of people, I think it's viewed as a new beginning, 2021. We'll see. But I'm happy to jump on that ship, the new beginnings of 2021. My guest today is Dango Rose. He was a founding member of the band Elephant Revival, and besides that has had a long career in the music industry and is doing all kinds of different things. In fact, currently he's got a solo career going, and he also has a studio where he focuses on artist development, artist empowerment, actually, as he puts it, which I absolutely love. Artist empowerment, production, songwriting. So he's got a studio in Boulder, and he's also putting out his own stuff. He grew up in the Chicago area next door to a band or a couple members of a band called Cornmeal, who was touring around in the jam scene for a long time, and he sort of got around their music and became influenced by music some in that way. He also spent a lot of time hanging around Chicago Old Town School of Folk Music, where he learned from some of the greats living in that town. Chicago, that town, if you've heard of it. As he got a little older, he started hitting the road, in the back of his car with his dog Nico and his upright bass. He knew that he was meant for a life in music when he was performing on the streets of New Orleans during Jazz Fest, and David Batiste, sort of the patriarch of the Batiste family, if you're familiar with New Orleans music, saw him on the street and picked him up and took him to, a jam, an open stage to play with tons of legendary New Orleans musicians, and including a lot of the other members of the Batiste family, and it just felt right to him. He moved to Colorado in 2001, and at the beginning of 2002 started playing with High and the Dog. He also started touring with a band called Uncle Earl, and he was able to play in that group with all kinds of great musicians, including touring with Abigail Washburn and Bela Fleck as a part of that group. We chat about all these things in the podcast, as well as what it's like to be snowed in a cabin with Pete Seeger. That's a true story, and he's going to tell us about it. What it's like touring before, the big online craze of Facebook and Instagram. He talks about the formation and the career of Elephant Revival. And one of the things I always ask artists, this is called Middle Class Rockstar. You don't have to sell out Red Rocks to come on Middle Class Rockstar. But for the artists that have, as Dango has, I'm always curious how it happened. And obviously lots of hard work and lots of persistence and some magic, but there's a lot of artists that work really hard. And I know there's a lot of hardworking artists that listen to this podcast. And the artists that make it to that level where they can announce their name and 10,000 tickets are sold, I always wonder to them, what was the intangible? What was it about that musical project that was different than the one before it? You see a lot of great artists that are on the cusp for a long time, and they just needed that one song. Like Nathaniel Rateliff, I think of that as a great example of that with Son of a Bitch a few years back. But there's something special about Elephant Revival. They had a chemistry, and when they started playing together, there was just something right about it. So I chatted with him and sort of asked, what was that thing? What was that intangible? What was it that made Elephant Revival Elephant Revival? And I really enjoyed what he had to say about that and how the band formed and all that, and just the whole curve of the band. And if you haven't heard of this group, I encourage you to go, after the podcast, go check them out on Spotify, wherever you listen to music, or buy a record, even better. They pioneered the genre Transcendental Folk. Dango penned several favorites from that band, including When I Fall, The Pasture, and Jet Lag Blues. Lately, he's been putting out a lot of music under his own name. He just put out an A-side, B-side. The first track was called Ring Out, and then the one that just came out a few weeks ago is called Life's Too Short. Both songs have a love does prevail theme about them and feel about them. The first track, Ring Out, is a collaboration with Grammy Award-winning fiddler Michael Cleveland. Cynthia D. Davis of Finding Folk says this about the song. In a time when everyone's struggles have been magnified and the world is heavy with hurt, it is the artist, the musician, and the poet who remind us how to unite. As I listen, Dango reminds me at the end of the day, we do have each other and we do have a voice. The song Life's Too Short is a lighthearted song about exactly that. Life's too short. In Dango's words, I get so caught up these days in the doing and all too often forget about the necessity of being. In the celebration of this struggle, this song is a reminder to take the time to remember to rejoice in the more important aspects of life, such as spending time with our loved ones and forging a path in accordance to the light. They're both beautiful songs. Go give them a listen on your favorite streaming platform. When I asked Dango for a track to play at the end of this episode, I thought I was going to get one of those two, but instead he sent me a song called Shadow of the Horse, which is a previously unreleased track, and he said it just feels appropriate for this. So I'm very excited to get to share some of that with you at the very end of the episode, Shadow of the Horse. I want to give a quick thanks to our sponsors. First, PQ Mastering. Patrick at PQ Mastering puts the finishing touches on this podcast, and for any of your audio or restoration needs, go to www.pqmastering.com. Also, Narrator Music, your home for simple and affordable licensing for sync, For more information, go to narratorrf.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, shoot me an email at middleclassrockstar@gmail.com. Hey, Dango, what's happening?
Doing pretty well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show, Andy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. And the big event right now is that you just came out with the second side of your A-side, B-side releases called Life's Too Short.
Yeah, so there were two songs that I just felt like they were going together pretty well. The first one was called Ring Out, and the second one, Life's Too Short. You know, just being able to take a look at what we do have in our lives to be grateful for, and also, you know, a reminder that, you know, through all the darkness, you know, love does prevail, and remembering to focus our hearts in that way. And I thought these songs represented that. So in terms of releasing music, I felt that it was just a good time to put them out there.
Yeah, I think they both have a great message. And I was noticing the production style listening through, and I was hoping you could talk about a little bit. I hear lots of other voices in Life's Too Short coming in and singing with you, which gives it sort of a playful feel in a way. And then with your lead vocals, a lot of the lyrics are sang, but also almost spoken in a way. And what was sort of your process behind the production?
Yeah, and this is an interesting one because when I was on the road, my production partner and songwriting partner would usually send me like bed tracks, you know, sometimes like acoustic guitar tracks, or in this case, tenor banjo. And then while I had time, you know, between sound check and show, I'd go backstage and, you know, sometimes take a listen and to what he sends me. And then if something hit right away, sort of like a top line gets written, and I just send it back to him immediately. And so we created this cool process flow over the years. And my production partner is Evan Reeves. And both of these tracks are examples of that kind of production where he sends me something, and then if it just hits, it hits. I send him something back in 15 minutes. And it's just like, okay, we have the working structure for a song. So that's both of these songs. So they really represent that co-writing and co-production relationship I have with my buddy Evan. So I almost forgot the question already.
I was just going to ask you to chat about the production style a little bit and how your singing was almost spoken in some ways.
Right. So that just sort of felt like it fit the narrative on this one, where it was almost more a narrative and almost like a Leonard Cohen type aesthetic, yet at the same time juxtaposed with sort of a vibrant, almost Southern gospel-y type feel in the background. So it's like that juxtaposition I find interesting. And there was a phase in my writing that's kind of how I was writing. And yeah, and then the background vocals, Evan and his partner Helen, yeah, they just had these awesome hype vocals, and they have a little writing group that they have called Heaven right now, Heven. So yeah, overall though, this production is a good example of the work that he and I do together. Yeah, sorry.
Where were these ones recorded?
If you'll excuse me, I have a cat whimpering outside the door.
Yeah, go for it.
These were recorded at my studio, our studio in Boulder. Elephant Collective is kind of our studio collective where we have different people working and coming in and out, and a whole bunch of studio musicians and like a wrecking crew and different producers and mixers and engineers. Wow. Yeah, so that's in downtown Boulder, and we've had it up and running for about 15 years and different iterations. And right now, that studio is taking on a whole new life, and it's feeling great.
So now with these two tracks out, you can't promote them in the same way that maybe you could have 12 months ago. What's your plan in regards to that?
You know, Ring Out was more focused on the political sort of situation that we were working with. and still are, of course. And then Life's Too Short is, Life's Too Short isn't as necessarily timely. Sorry. Hope you're able to edit this, as I have a rambunctious animal in the room.
No, it's all
But promotion at this point, it's really just playlists, man. Just trying to get the songs on as many playlists as possible so people hear them all over the world. Working with different promoters in that way, keeping a social media presence, being as real as possible in whatever form or medium that is for each individual. And then, doing live streams when possible, if that's your thing. It's not everybody's thing. I do a few, but not on the regular. And then, there's it's almost just like its own discussion, like how are musicians promoting themselves during a time of lockdown and quarantine when the live music market isn't there.
sure.
And I'd be happy to speak to that for sure.
Well, sure, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, so Patreon is a cool thing that a lot of musicians are doing. Having patrons to the art and being able to contribute in those ways. Social media presence, of course, is important, but we're working with an algorithm, and there's always challenges there. And I think what really comes across is when you're as real, authentic, and vulnerable as possible. So my encouragement to most of the musicians out there is, just being as real as you can be with your fans and connecting in those ways. And then also to look at where you want the music to go, what platforms, whether it's Bandcamp, Patreon. Of course, the bigger streaming ones are the harder to monetize, of course. So you gotta take so much into consideration these days.
Well, and I appreciate you elaborating on that a little bit. I know a lot of the listener base is indie musicians, and so they'll appreciate that. And actually, I think we'll probably circle back around on that concept on something a little later. But I wanted to jump backwards. You've been touring for almost 20 years. How did that start for you? Where'd you grow up, and what was the first project that you started hitting the road with?
Yeah, I grew up in Chicago, and when I was 15, a band called Cornmeal moved in next door, and they were kind of on the jam scene for quite some time. And I really got to watch them sort of form and become a band. And I had been playing for a couple of years at that point, probably started when I was like 13, so a young teenager. And that was really awesome because then there were all these Chicago musicians coming in and out of a shared driveway space that we shared. And I was witnessing all their rehearsals. My neighbor, Jason Berger, who helped found that band, was a great songwriter. And then I also would go down after school to the Chicago Old Town School of Folk Music, probably 2 to 3 days a week, and just start learning, from some of the great teachers in Chicago. So that was sort of like that part of it all. But then I really just hit the road, and I was traveling back and forth from Southwest Virginia to Illinois to Colorado to Oregon, and really crisscrossing the country with an upright bass in the back of my Isuzu Trooper and my dog Nico at the time. And it was really formulative experience. What was the biggest marker, though, was when I was down in New Orleans for Jazz Fest. I was with my buddy Carl Cole, who soon became the bus driver for Elephant Revival.
Okay.
A real Neil Cassidy kind of character, So I was living on the streets with him and playing music. He was a drummer. I was a bass player at the time. So we had an upright bass, a mini kit, and we picked up a great guitarist, songwriter in Colorado, and we became a street trio. And it was incredible. And David Bautiste, the father, the patriarch of the Bautiste family, saw us playing, and he picked me up off the street and took me to St. Augustine High School during the Jazz and Heritage Festival, and put me on stage with all these incredible musicians, famous New Orleans musicians, including more of the Bautiste family,
Yeah.
like the Meters,
Right.
And they just had me come out there and like play Love Light, and it was incredible. And that was the turning point, um, where I knew that I was on the musical path, because I was doing a lot of different things as well. And I think I was 19 at the time.
Yeah.
And once again, I forgot what your actual question was. So
Me too. That's okay. It sounds like you had a melting pot of influences, and that shows throughout your career with different projects, and especially being somewhere like New Orleans, that is a melting pot in and of itself, with tons of different musical types and stuff. Would be, um, something that would really inspire you. So, and upright bass, that was your main instrument for a while, right? Because I know I've seen you play some other things, banjo and mandolin and stuff as well, but that's what you were pursuing for a while.
yeah, upright bass has always been number one. And the reason being is I was always really drawn to world music, all different cultures, all different world musics. And I just realized that the bass is very much relevant to every single cultural music and all world musics. And I think that's what really drew me to the bass at that time. And the same could be said for any instrument. Any instrument can be, put into the context of world music.
Sure.
But there's just something so primordial and foundational about bass. And that's what led me to it. And who would have known, from where the path began to where it is now.
Yeah.
I ended up in Colorado in September 2001, and I joined High on the Hog old time string band in January 2002. Performed with them for 2 or 3 years, toured the country with an old Panasonic cell phone and road maps. So I got on the tail end of that,
Yeah.
and I joined an all female string band called Uncle Earl. So got to hang out with Abigail Washburn and Kristen Andreasen and Raina Gellert, and Bela Fleck was with us during that time. So spent some
Wow.
time on the road with Bela. And then went to New York to join the Mammals, and spent a lot of time with Mike and Ruth Unger, Jay Unger, Molly Mason, and also Pete Seeger, because I was roommates with Tao Rodriguez Seeger, and that was just incredible. One of the greatest experiences, like of markers in my life, was being able to spend time with Pete Seeger and getting snowed in up at his cabin in Beacon, New York, and just listening to all the stories. And
Sure. Well,
yeah,
we gotta backtrack a little bit because you just covered a bunch of great things that we can delve into. First off, what was the influence like being on the road with, an Abigail Washburn and a Bela Fleck? What did you learn from them?
that well, Bela is one of the most humble, just beautiful humans, and I was always like, it always felt like there was something unattainable, at a certain level of artistry or mastery, and that like these people must be like almost like untouchable or something like that. And that was just a falsehood in my mind, as a teenager or something. But then just realizing that the greatest musicians and performers out there are usually, so much of the time, the most humble, kind, caring, people, and that their mentality is really wanting everyone, to have the opportunity to succeed and to be the best that they can be. And I felt that from Bela. And at the time, Abigail was, just one of my friends, and it's just really sweet. Um, I was young. I was in my early 20s. I was definitely a little bit starstruck, but I worked with it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if it felt that way, and I mean, after a while, did they all just feel like friends and fellow players to you?
Yeah, yeah. And just so much respect at the time. I was just in awe of like where at that point in time the path of my life was taking me, and just enjoying the ride and man, I had so much to learn,
Yeah.
and so I was very open.
Oh, that's really neat. And so now, Pete Seeger, as if it's, a trivia question on a Snapple bottle. What do you do with Pete Seeger stuck in a cabin?
Hmm. Well, you take out the banjo, and Toshi was making stew, Pete's wife, and then I forget the man's name, but there was one other man there who was doing a new version of Ring Out, or not Ring Out, Sing Out. Ring Out was my single. So there was like this whole revisionist thing going on of all the catalog of great American folk music. And so that was so cool. And then I had just been to West Africa at the time. Had just gone back from Senegal, where I was studying West African music. And so Pete was really intrigued by that. So he was showing me like pygmy traditional banjo rhythms, and how that relates to American folk music. And and at the time it was 2003. Somebody had just dropped off The Audacity of Hope, Barack Obama's first book.
Yeah.
This was before the 2004 convention. And so we had this huge discussion about Barack Obama, and just, how he believed that he was going to be, one of the great leaders of the country. And then he passed down that book to me. And just, man, talk about American culture, huh?
Did you get something out of the book?
Oh, totally. I don't remember. I read it 16, 17 years ago.
Before he was famous.
Before he was famous, which I'm really glad I did, because I got to see a side of him before there was a media portrayal of him,
Right.
And I could relate, because he was from Chicago and I was from Chicago. I didn't live on the South Side or anything, but, I could relate to those stories about being a community organizer in the city, what that must have been like for him. And then, cool stuff.
What was your goal at this point as you're traveling the country and meeting all kinds of great artists and touring in different bands? Were you planning world domination or selling out Red Rocks or stadiums? What was your reason for being at that point? What was your big goal?
Well, when I got to Colorado, I went to the Telluride Bluegrass Festival, as so many do. And I remember sitting on the hillside over town, overlooking Sunday night sunset. And I never even had a ticket to get into the festival. So I was pretty much in town the whole time and listening to what I could. And I found a spot on the hillside that had a reverberating echo. And Sam Bush broke into Girl from the North Country, the Bob Dylan song. And that was the moment where I said to myself, I'm going to play. I am going to play on that stage one day, And so that was another pinnacle moment where I just made the decision, that was going to happen. It was never about world domination. It sounds so funny saying it, but it was always about also like the band, putting the band together and finding the right people and creating something bigger than ourselves and being able to share that with people so that they too could tap into that essence and find a deeper meaning and truth in their lives, the people listening, so that they could make better decisions essentially about how they want to contribute to the world and creating a better life on this planet for ourselves and future generations. And there was always a very holistic, humanistic approach to why I would do the things that I would do. And so, Red Rocks wasn't specifically as much of a dream until it became the dream of sort of like the management agency.
Right.
Or like the management of the band. It was like, well, this is the pinnacle of like Colorado, Telluride, Red Rocks, playing Betcher Hall with the symphony. Yeah. And I was like, cool. Yeah. Big three, the big three.
Well, and you did those, right? You accomplished the big three. And how was that group put together that you accomplished that with?
So we started running into each other in 2003. Like it's all part of this formulation stage. Bonnie and Daniel met in 2003. Bridget and I met at a festival in 2003. She was doing a fiddle competition. I was performing. We met dancing in a rainstorm, one of those Colorado rainstorms where the sun's out and then there's the rainbow and everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, Bonnie and Dan met on a rooftop in New London, Connecticut. We met Sage at Winfield, and we just started and Bridget and I met Bonnie at Winfield as well. And we literally heard each other before we found each other. We were like, she had heard Bridget and I playing, and then Bridget and I had heard this washboard, from across the campground. And we found each other, and we just, spent the whole weekend together. And then we would just meet up for the next like 2 years, like everywhere, like California, New Mexico, Oregon, Oklahoma, Colorado, out on the East Coast, Connecticut, New York. And we would just crisscross and meet up with each other whenever we could, Kansas. And then we really came together in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, which is the Cherokee Nation. And it's where Bonnie's family was from. And I lived there for almost 2 years. And toward the end of that time, we started coming together more and more and more. And started doing some shows in that area. And there's this moment. Tahlequah, Oklahoma is the end of the Trail of Tears. So it's where all the Southern tribes of the Southeast were marched in the 1830s, right? And so there's a very profound energy there. You have to find it because there's a lot of other stuff too. But I climbed this mountain called Sparrowhawk. I climbed up Sparrowhawk Mountain, which was overlooking the Illinois River. There's all these old arrowheads and stuff like that. And I was at my wit's end. It was serious. I was impoverished. I didn't have it, like things just weren't working there anymore. Like I couldn't find a job. I was running out of money. I loved the family. I loved the people. I loved the tribe. I loved Merv Jacob, the artist, and the local coffee shop. And there was so much good about it, and beautiful water and beautiful springs and beautiful forests on the foothills of the Ozark. But I knew that it was just time. And I went up this mountain on Sparrowhawk Mountain, sat on a ledge, and just opened up myself in meditation. And I just sort of one of those moments, like, Great Spirit, show me a sign, show me something.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
In that moment, a bald eagle spreads its wings, full spread, 5 feet in front of me. And just, I swear it was like just stood, like stayed there, It was like just like this moment, and then just like, lifted off.
Yeah.
And in that moment, it was like the elephant revival. And at the time, it was the Great American Elephant Revival concept, but it was like, now is the time to call the band together. And so I put out the call. I booked some shows. I put out the call. Invited a lot of people. And you can look at our history and be very aware of who showed up.
So let me get this straight. A bald eagle gave you a sign to start the band, but he was okay with you naming it after a different kind of animal.
Well, the Bald Eagle Project, I don't know. Well, the elephant inspiration came from when I was in Chicago at the Lincoln Park Zoo.
Yeah.
I was caged. I was a caged animal.
Yeah.
But I was passing through, and I was spending 3 weeks in Chicago. And I was busking outside of the elephant cage at the Lincoln Park Zoo. And this was the time where there were 3 elephants there, and they had been together for 16 years, and they had all been separated recently. And each of those elephants in the separation passed away for different reasons, sort of like unexplained, either in transport to their new zoo or when they got to the new zoo. So like in this idea of like, zoos buying elephants from other zoos and like trying to they forgot the tribal nature of the elephant, where they stick together,
Yeah.
and that's how they mourn their dead, and they're very ceremonious pachyderms. So that's where the elephant revival concept came in, was to revive the spirit of those lost elephants, and to sort of rekindle that memory of what tribe is like, or what it can be like in the modern day, in our modern culture, when taking into consideration animals and indigenous cultures and all that.
And so then the band formed, and I just think that story is really cool, by the way, about the eagle. And I mean, to jump back to it one more time, do you think if you hadn't asked for a sign, do you think the eagle still would have been there? Or do you think it specifically it came for you in that moment?
It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
But if I wasn't there asking for the sign, right, I wouldn't have been there long enough for it to happen.
See the eagle.
Mm-hmm.
So the group gets started, and it sounds like you guys are all just running around the circuit together for a few years, seeing each other, and there's some magic there. When the band gets started, how long does it take before you start picking up some traction?
I think the traction we felt right away, as far as like feeling response from people, but we were slow moving, like a pack of elephants might be.
Yeah.
And also, staying true to where we were at in our lives of, being in our early mid-20s, and just sort of exploring life and getting settled, in Colorado again, and doing it the old-fashioned way too, traveling around the country in a veggie oil school bus that Sage converted. It became our sort of traveling home, going to small towns. Like we toured Utah and Idaho so much. It's like, who gets started and just tours small towns in Utah and Idaho?
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be so great for like the formulation of our sound, and picking up veg oil on the road. And it was just a different kind of path. It wasn't like we're going to release an album and tour it and come back and record another album. It was just, we probably toured for 2 years before we released an album. And we were like, selling burned CDs out of the back of the bus with like hand drawn covers,
Right.
And we were so fortunate to be in like 2 different time frames. It was before social media, like MySpace was just coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess booking and I guess all that stuff was much different then. When I started doing it, we were all on Facebook and Instagram. You're driving around for a couple years, almost living off the land. It sounds like getting your vegetable oil, going places and playing. Um, was that some of the most freeing times for you as a touring artist?
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, is one of those great chapters of life. Yeah, it's just being able to, like when we were in Montana, for instance, like staying at low hot springs, and just being able to stay there, or stopping at this beautiful spring, waterfall area, and sometimes having 1 or 2 days off and camping at a campground in northern Idaho, and all of us just being there and going off our own ways and writing songs and coming back to the bus and bringing them together. And looking in retrospect, it's a chapter in my life that I will never forget, and more than likely never live in the same way ever again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to spend too much more time on on elephant revival, because I want to get into some other things too that are going on with your career. But I wanted to ask, when you guys got Red Rocks big, right? Where you were a marquee name that could sell out clubs and play big theaters. What was it about you guys? So many bands go out and do it. So many bands go out and do it, and so many stay just playing small towns in Utah and Idaho. But you guys ended up doing, playing to some very large crowds. What was it about that group that was special? What clicked in just the right way?
So there's two obvious markers. Of course, the voice of the wonderful Bonnie Payne, and well, three, I guess. The violin playing and the presence of Bridget, and the amazing songwriting of Daniel Rodriguez. Right, that's what a lot of people noticed first and foremost, and much respect to that. It's all absolutely 100% true. However, the band Elephant Revival was greater than the sum of its parts. So when we came together, there was a synergy, there was a magic, there was something that happened. And that's where the magic comes in. And that's about being with the right people at the right time. And it's about letting go of certain elements of your own individual ego for the betterment of the whole. And it very much like the band, Levon, Rick, Richard, Garth, Robbie, it was that same kind of synergy. It was just like, whoa, what happens when these certain musicians come together, drawing from their deep wellspring of personal individual influences and come together in this band. And we stayed true to that. And then also, we stayed true to the song. The song was always the guide first and foremost, and we worked in service to it. And so we worked in service to the muse, we worked in service to the song, and honestly, we worked in service to our fans. That is at least my mentality. I know that it was shared. And yeah.
And that was the thing. That was the main gig until, what was it, 2018?
Yeah, we played our final show in May of 2018. And it's termed as an indefinite hiatus. And so I keep terming it that way. Just to leave a glimmer of hope for the future.
Sure, of course. And since that time, you've been doing a lot of things. You've been working solo, doing your solo project. You're working with other artists. So let's get into that a little bit. You've just put out this A-side, B-side. You mentioned in 2021, I think you're going to put out 4 EPs that have been written and recorded by you over the last 12 to 13 years. What was the decision, or how was the decision made to put those out now?
I think it's this almost acceptance piece or coming to terms, these are chapters of my life and my experience as an artist and a creative and a songwriter. And so while off the road with Elephant Revival, I would be in the studio, that we were speaking about earlier, and recording with my friend Evan. And there were sort of these different life cycles or chapters of works that we would record. And the first was in the winter of 2008, 2009, over the Christmas time, where I was writing on a Civil War fretless banjo from the 1860s. Wow. And created a series of songs called Banjo Poems. I did a soft release of that in 2009, where I printed out 300 copies and just gave them to family and friends. But that was it. So I'm going to release a portion of that onto the streaming services. And then there was this next era, was from 2011 to 2014 maybe. And we call that the forgotten years, because we recorded so much and yet kind of forgot all about it. So it's when I go into that archive, it's whoa, what is that? It's okay. And so in that era, there's almost an acceptance of this is what was done then. I'm not going to try to fix it. I'm not going to try to make it better. I'm going to be very truthful to what it was. And then from there, it was more experimental, the next phase, where we got more electronic with some things. We had some different people in the studio. There was a little bit more spoken word, even like verging on some hip hop type of feels, and doing more theatrical stuff. And so there's like this whole theatrical section of songs that have a whole different production element or style. And right now that's called the experimental sessions. And that was probably from like 2015 or 2014 to 2017. And then from 2017 and 2018, while still in the band and when the band was breaking up or going on hiatus, as it were, we were creating this new kind of sound that we called steam pop. So it had like more pop elements of production, also the folk elements, and then like a little bit of steampunk and, working with minimalism and also adding certain aspects at certain times to create momentum and feel. And so that's some of the more recent stuff. But even given that, like that creates the timeline from like 2008 to 2018. And so like right now I'm super excited about, recording a bunch of the material that I've been writing, since 2018. So like, it's just, the creative process never ends. It's ongoing. And so just being able to look at it as different chapters in life of like an overall chronology, that's kind of the aim of the project. And getting over that fear of releasing, stuff that is what it is, I guess you can say.
Sure. How would you title the chapter that you're in right now? You talked about the forgotten years, and these different, where you're in a different place spiritually, a different place musically. What is this chapter called down the line from 2018 to whenever?
The first thing that came to mind would just be transitions. Just transitions. This has been a huge transitionary period, phase of life. And I'm doing a course right now with a group here based out of Colorado and Michigan called the Men's Leadership Alliance. And it's all about, the course is called Transitions to Transformation. And it's all about, different life cycles and the transition periods and being in the liminal space, as it were, as an actual valid phase of life and not just something to like push through or get to the other side, and to really like honor the liminal space as like part of the overarching sort of experience on the arc of life and our 7-year cycles.
Wow. It sounds like both in life and your musical life in general, even though you're going under your own name now as a solo project, you're still very much a believer in collaboration and what everybody and what every individual person and energy can bring to the project.
Absolutely. And, I also have on the calendar to go out to Kansas to do some work with my buddy Sage from Elephant Revival from, some of the older days. He's got a studio out there, and we're going to invite our very good friend Sam Birchfield, who's an incredible singer-songwriter and performer out of Atlanta. So yeah, that's Sam Birchfield. He just released an album called Graveyard Flower. And the three of us are going to be working on something in 2021. So I'm not sure what that's going to become.
Yeah.
Honestly. And then also, forgot your question again.
I was so engaged in what you were saying, I forgot it too. I was just asking about the importance of collaboration for you, even still. And I think you answered it.
Yeah. And also in production too, like I do artist development work and what I've termed artist empowerment work.
Right.
And that's really being funneled through the production work that I do with people, and being able to help catalyze that spark of magic through the collaborative process. of working on music and songs and bringing them to the studio.
You segued perfectly into what I was just about to ask you about, and I think it's very interesting that and I love that you're using the term artist empowerment. I don't think a lot of artists they're familiar with that. Um, so very hip of you. And and so what's that process like if from start to finish with you, if somebody wants to work on a song, and how could somebody listening to this podcast who says, I have some great songs I'd love to work with Dango on, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, great question. So the production process, we do begin with songwriting and get sort of going into the incubator, if you will, and looking at the song structure, song form. Sometimes choruses become verses. Sometimes the bridge becomes the chorus. Sometimes we look at the lyrics. Are we saying things more than once that don't need to be said? Where's the hook? What is the hook? How do we want to play that hook? And so our pre-production process does include songwriting elements, which can be edgy for a lot of musicians and songwriters because each song is like their precious China doll.
Right.
So we work with that too because it's so important to be able to open yourself up to that kind of work as an artist. And then the empowerment work, it's sort of like almost like coaching on creative practices and how to develop good routines and morning practices that set your day up so that you have time for working on the craft, and that becomes as important part of your days as almost anything else. And so building those muscles on a cognitive level. And then back in the studio, then getting into production. And it all sort of becomes like its own thing. It's almost like artist development has been like one of the terms used in the industry for years, but for us it's artist empowerment, songwriting, and which also includes pre-production, of course, and production. And so folks can hit me up through my website, dangorose.com. And my email, the best for this kind of work, is dango@dangorose.com.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that these are in the show notes. So if you're listening and, you're familiar with Dango's music and what he does, you can just drop him a line. So check out the show notes.
That would be great. Yeah, I'd love to hear from any and all of you. So.
Well, did I leave out anything? I was about to wrap up. Did I leave out anything?
Not too much I could think of. I think we talked about a lot.
We covered as much as you could hope to in 40 minutes. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your collaboration ideas and going through your musical journey with us. I appreciate it very much and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Andy. It's been a great interview. I'm excited that you have me on, and very grateful. And middle class rock stars, man.
Right on. Thanks, man.
Thanks so much.
All right. What do you think? Should we let him stay? Should we let him hang around? I think Dango's a pretty cool cat myself, and I think his cat's a pretty cool cat too. And I thank him or her. I thank the cat for joining in the interview. We're about to hear an unreleased track from Dango. I feel so privileged to be able to play that on this podcast called Shadow of the Horse. And as we were chatting about earlier this week, it's really a representation of where Dango's headed this next year. He mentioned in the interview releasing several EPs from different parts of his life. And I think that's just fascinating how he's deciding to do that now and how he's going about the releases. So be on the lookout for his music. Of course, there's links to check him out in the show notes. And here is Shadow of the Horse. As always, If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast. It's a huge help. If you'd like to help out in a monetary way, go to patreon.com/Andy Sidow, spelled SYDOW. For any questions, comments, concerns, hate mail, or death threats, you can fire those over to me at middleclassrockstar@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.
Holy roller in the shadow of the horse, when the rider and the horse are one. Holy rounder through the shadow of remorse, which way will I run? Met you back in the valley of our love, when the Black Hills were your home. But the Union gave birth to a stillborn son and claimed you for their own. But you shot back like the rider Jesse James. No ghost will haunt your claim. Crazy horse and the spirit of the bull. No rider dies in vain. Holy roller in the shadow of the horse, when the rider and the horse are one. Holy roller through the shadow of remorse, which way will I run? The shadow of the horse, when the rider and the horse are one. Holy rounder through the shadow of remorse, which way leads back home? Rounded up by the Union slaves, ordered by the high command. Musket shots of the purest lead, murdered on sacred land. The earth was froze, so the blood did stay, till the springtime melted snow. Blue and gray, we still go on this way, wounded knee and broken bow. Holy roller in the shadow of the horse, when the rider and the horse are one. Through the shadow of remorse, which way will I run? Holy roller in the shadow of the horse, when the rider and the horse are one. Holy rounder through the shadow of remorse, which way leads back home? Holy roller in the shadow of the horse, when the rider and the horse are one. Holy rounder through the shadow of remorse, which way leads back home?
Middle class rock star.